Hi, everyone. Good evening. I hope you all are doing really well, and I'm thankful to be here. I appreciate the invitation, Brittany, and thank you to Matt for the inspiration about what variety in education can look like. And I'm looking forward to sharing more with you all about connecting education and our communities. Like Brittany said, my name is Danika Robison. I'm in charge of programs and curriculum at the Field Academy, which is a tiny nonprofit in Denver. And in my time working in traditional and untraditional classrooms and schools, I've really been inspired by models that allow students to see how their education is applicable to the world around them, and allow them to draw on what I think is inherent curiosity that everyone has. So I believe that this is such a powerful component to our academic studies, and tonight I'm hoping to share with you some strategies and ideas for how you can integrate community-based education into your work with students, whether that's as a homeschool parent, in the classroom, or in creating curriculum, or in any way that you might be involved in the education space. So very briefly about the Field Academy, we typically work with students who are struggling in the traditional education system in some way. Oftentimes they are not attending school all the time or have failed one or more classes, and we use community-based education to try to re-engage them in their communities and in a path forward through working in their communities and surrounding ones. So we want students to really see tangible applications for their learning. And we allow students to recover credits through this process. However, I believe that this approach can be really engaging and meaningful for absolutely any learner. And I'm biased, but I think it's also engaging and enjoyable for instructors to plan and implement as well. So to get us started, I'd like us to discuss a little bit at our tables what have been meaningful or impactful educational moments in our own lives, and hopefully that can give us a little bit of inspiration for some planning that we will do in a few minutes. So if you could turn to someone at your table and introduce yourself if you haven't already, and think about a time that you learned something that has really stuck with you. So I encourage you to think about something beyond, oh, I enjoyed this class in high school because, but is there a time that you have a really vivid association with something that you learned? Maybe you remember exactly what it was or where you were or who taught it to you, and what you took away from that. It could be inside or outside of a classroom, and if you can just, share with your neighbor what's something that you learned and what you think made it stick. We'll talk for 1 minute and then we'll switch. Ready, go. One minute warning. If you haven't switched yet, please do now. 1 minute warning. Sure.
Field Academy, is it all grades?
It's high school.
It is? So it's
Yeah.
9 through 12?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes students are out of system or like they're in between grades, but anybody in high school.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm happy to tell you more about our program after. My presentation is kind of more focused on curriculum design, but I'm happy to share.
I work at the high school, so I was just wondering where.
Okay, great. All right, everyone, let's wrap up our conversations and bring it back in. Get your last thoughts out. Okay. 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 All right, everybody. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for digging into conversations. Sometimes you do so a little bit more easily than high school students that don't know each other yet, so that's great. I wanted us to think a little bit more about meaningful educational moments for us because that's ultimately what we're seeking to create for students. Something vivid that maybe in 1, 5, or 20 years, they'll be able to draw from and think about, oh, that was really an aha moment for me. And we don't know whether that's going to be someone that they met, some new location that they were, but we want to be able to provide a platform for students to be able to have those moments that really stick with them. So like I said, maybe we can come back to the moments that we shared for inspiration when we're working on a little bit of planning in a few minutes. So as always, there's a lot going on in education right now, and another reason why I think community-based education is particularly relevant always and at this moment is that we see a lot in patterns and data from students that they're seeking something different and perhaps complementary to the education system. So, for example, we're seeing that not a lot of students strongly agree that their learning feels challenging, engaging, and meaningful. Of course, a big topic in education has been absenteeism, as a lot of students are kind of checking out, attending school less, and that's something that's doubled across the country since about 2019. And we're all seeing teachers feel this pretty acutely in the classroom, as many teachers are saying that they're seeing greater disengagement amongst students than they did before the pandemic. So this, to me, is no slight at the amazing work that educators are doing, that administrators are doing. It just is a demonstration that students are seeking something different and something new. And it tells us a little bit about priorities for students right now. So I think it illuminates that there can be a complement to the existing important work that people are doing in schools that can offer a path for students to engage in their learning and deepen their dive into their education if they're not doing so already. So I think that a valuable way to do that and build that community and build that engagement is community-based learning. So that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about, community-based learning is a model that integrates academic study with real-world issues and topics. It highlights community interests and needs and is developed in partnership with organizations and local businesses in order to draw on their knowledge and involve an exchange of knowledge between students and partners. So community-based learning oftentimes involves outings or field trips or experiences being out in the world, but it also goes a step beyond that in terms of really integrating those experiences with academic learning, and I think that those two, like I mentioned, complement each other in really important ways. So this model of community-based learning is rooted in the belief that learners are co-investigators in the process of their education and active participants. It's rooted in expansive experiences that allow students to analyze real-world situations. And the model also believes that all of this ultimately invites engaged citizens in the future as students are able to see their role in their communities and build critical thinking abilities that help them to understand why things are as they are and what's going on around them. So I'm going to share a couple of examples of what Field Academy classes look like in practice. This isn't to brag about how cool our program is or something like that, but hopefully it helps to get some wheels turning about how you might be able to do this, again, in any situation that you are working with students. So you can think about what are the interests of your learners, what are your interests that you might like to highlight, and how could that become a community-based learning class. So one example of English and social studies lessons that we've done was in a mountain town called Leadville in Colorado. And we focused on the issue of affordable housing that has recently been blowing up particularly intensely in Leadville. And as this is such an important issue in so many communities across the country, I imagine that this would be applicable in many locations. So how the day was structured was that we would start out learning a bit of history about the community, and then we always want students to be prepared with context so that they're better able to engage with partners and dig into what's going on around them. So after working through some readings in small groups to learn more about what's going on with this issue and how communities are responding, then we would visit a local housing authority where we're able to hear a little bit more from local leaders about what they're doing in their communities, how communities are responding, and students are able to have a dialogue about some of the similarities and differences that they see in their home communities. After that, we set students loose to do a little bit of exploration in the downtown area, always tasked with something. And for example, in this case, they would be asking a couple of questions to people that they come across, such as, how long have you lived here and how have you seen Leadville change in that time? And then people always have a lot to say about things like that, so we'd come back together, share what we learned, and then get into a persuasive writing class and activity where students share something write to an elected official about their experience in Leadville and a little bit about a solution that they learned and they would like to advocate for. I just wanted to point out, too, that I think that curriculum is often really straightforward to connect to state standards. For example, Oregon standards about local and regional issues and analyzing accounts of a subject in different mediums were really straightforward ones to connect to this lesson. So I imagine that if you have an idea for something that you would like to create a community-based lesson around, that it would be pretty easy to tie it to state standards, and you're probably earning a lot of topics in doing so. Another example related to math, admittedly not my own specialty, but I think with a bit of creativity, it can really feel applicable to students' futures, and it can be a great way to tie in a lot of important considerations that local business owners have to make and are tied to interests that students have in the future. So one math class, for example, our students met with a local coffee shop owner named Jocelyn. We were able to hear about her knowledge related to coffee producers in her home country of Burundi and how challenges have been only growing for them in recent years. We heard from her about the importance of fair trade policies and what coffee producers need to earn in order to make ends meet. So then, with this information in mind, we had an afternoon business algebra class where students were looking at word problems and the context that Jocelyn had given us in order to work through problems related to being a local business owner, costs, what you have to in order to earn a profit and to be able to support those in your supply chain. So something that I think is important to think about in creating these lessons and activities is that hopefully students have an illuminating experience, but also we want them to be able to tie it to some greater project that they're working towards or be part of their trajectory of learning at a given time. So for example, a lesson like this was tied to a project related to students designing their own business model where they researched business models and then put one together, creating a budget and applying the skills that they had learned from community partners. So at this point, if you're thinking, that's all well and good, that sounds like a nice idea, Danika, but I have a lot of demands, a full-time job, curriculum, testing, professional development, grading, supporting students, all of those things, and beyond. I want to encourage you that community-based learning can look like a whole spectrum of things, and it doesn't mean that every educational aspect or everything that you're teaching needs to be integrated with a community partner by any means. I think that some really strategic experiences can go a long way in illuminating learning for students. For example, if you're teaching in a classroom, maybe thinking about a guest star that you could have once per year to help tie together a trajectory or project that you've been working on is great. Or maybe you could have an outing per semester, or students do an interview project that then they conduct those interviews at home or outside of class and then bring that knowledge back together. If you're working in a space where you have more flexibility, maybe you have a chance to connect with multiple community partners who can highlight various different perspectives on an issue. Maybe there's a local initiative going on in the community and students are able to hear from a variety of stakeholders. Or maybe you're looking at a topic or theme, for example, a food system, and students are able to see various different aspects of that system in action. And then ultimately, a unit can pull from a variety of experiences that students have had. But again, just a reminder that there's a whole continuum, and wherever you feel like you might be interested in jumping into that is right where you're supposed to be, and I think it can still be an illuminating experience for students. Okay. Local leaders and community organizations and businesses are obviously a really important aspect of allowing this to come to life. And there's a lot of different ways that local businesses or organizations can get involved. For example, career-related exposure, I think, is huge right now. I so often hear from young people that there's understandably an important emphasis on career readiness, but it's so hard to choose a possible pathway when you haven't had a chance to try something out. So an observational internship that is a few hours to something more immersive, I think would be so appreciated and goes a long way in terms of allowing students to see whether it's a field that they could picture themselves in. Service opportunities are great opportunities for students to learn more about how an organization works and the why behind a local topic, as well as getting involved in some way in the process. And also, just meeting people at different organizations and hearing about their trajectories and their stories and journeys, I think helps young people to understand their communities in a different way, as well as potential opportunities that may be available to them. So I'd like to take a moment for another brief activity and just to brainstorm some of the amazing resources that already exist in this community and in this room. So if we can take 90 seconds to think about what businesses, organizations, or locations we could see welcoming students. So if you can just, it doesn't need to be an idea that you know is feasible right now, if just anything that comes to mind that seems like it could be an engaging opportunity or a place to take students, let's take a blank sheet of paper for our table if possible and note down all those options so that it's a resource we can continue to build from. Go ahead, thank you. Let's take another 15 seconds to wrap up our conversations. All right, everyone, let's bring it back in. Our final ideas down on paper. Thank you. Okay. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to hearing more about this over dinner. Okay. So having identified some great ideas in the community, let's talk a little bit more about how we could put this together. So if you're going to try to plan a unit or topic and integrate community-based learning, I encourage you to think about starting with what do you want students to ultimately learn? What's our endpoint that we want students to be able to understand, or what do we want them to be able to do or create? And from there, I think that you'll be able to more easily find some partnerships to figure out how to get there. And then with those partnerships and getting to build relationships with community partners can help us to design lessons and experiences for students to be able to have a meaningful interaction and great context for understanding those interactions. So as I mentioned a little bit before, community-based learning is oftentimes much more than just the experience itself, which can feel maybe exciting or maybe like a headache in order to plan, but I do think it's worth it. And with an outline in place, we can then start thinking about how to implement a whole community-based learning experience. So again, that might start with context and designing your classes to help students prepare for an experience, to develop questions and think critically about what they're going to see and engage with during an experience. Then comes what you've prepared for in terms of connecting students with community partners. And then afterwards, reflection is a really key aspect in order to help students kind of marry that context and the experiences that they had in order to dig in and gain a deeper understanding. And there's all sorts of creative ways that that can happen. And then ultimately, in any topic, unit, semester that you're going through, hopefully students will be able to continue to make connections between the context that you've shared and the experiences that they're gaining. So building on what we just started, I would love for you to be able to take something a little bit tangible from this session. So if you're willing, I'd love to have you all try and practice an initial outline based on a topic that you enjoy, a class that you teach, a business that you work for, or an issue that's important to you. And you could use this model if that's straightforward enough, but just think about who's your audience, what are these classes, who would you like to work with, and what would you like students ultimately to learn from this experience. I think that the same model would work if you're a business leader. What ages might you like to work with? What class might this fit for? Do you have any partnerships with families or schools that you'd like to come to fruition for this? And what do you hope students would learn? If folks are feeling like you don't already have a community partnership in mind that you're thinking of, or a little bit stuck as to how you might implement this with one kiddo if you're a homeschool parent, I encourage you to think about just different settings or things that I believe are partnerships, but it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily need an hour-long community presentation in order to do something like this. So, for example, maybe you can have a social studies and English language arts class that's related to public murals in town, and it helps students to think about how we remember the past, what is included and emphasized, and what might be left out through visiting those murals. And maybe this could also be connected to an ELA class where students ultimately practice writing a children's book to think about tone and audience. Or maybe it's ultimately connected to a narrative nonfiction exercise. So I think that there's a lot of ways for classes to be integrated and to do things with small groups of students as well. Or another example might be maybe students can do something related to vivid imagery and descriptive writing. And you go to try some different foods at a shop in town, or you go to a farmer's market, and students practice noting all sorts of different sensory imagery surrounding them, and then put together their own piece based on that experience. So just a couple of little snippets if that's helpful. So let's take about a minute and a half to work through our outline, and then we can share with our buddies at our table. Are there any questions before we get started with this? Does this make enough sense to go for it? Okay, all right, a minute and a half for an outline, a record for lesson planning.
Like you're smiling and talking to the crowd over here and say the word yes.
Okay, sure. No worries. I'm still good, thank you. I'm almost done. Yeah, like a minute. I'm sure it's long. Okay.
I always do that because
That
sometimes...
actually doesn't look that fake.
No, saying the word yes leads your something to do. Some speakers get so into what they're saying that we need that spark.
Thank you. Let's take one more minute to wrap up our outlines. All right, everyone, let's get our final thoughts down and bring it back together. Okay, Thank you so much, everyone, for trying out the activity and being eager planners. I appreciate it, and I'd love to hear more about your thoughts. So I don't want to keep blah, blah, blahing at you all night, so I'm going to leave you with a few parting points and excited to continue the discussion afterwards or beyond. So just as a refresher, remembering why community-based learning is designed to give students really tangible applications and vivid associations with their learning. So I hope that the extra processes in planning this really pay off. Also, in remembering how important relationships are in our partnerships. I think that it can feel like a daunting process, but oftentimes our partners are such amazing collaborators and experts that getting to know them and their passions and their stories helps us to design really amazing questions for students to engage with them. And you're really a facilitator. There's no need to have all the answers. And finally, if there's anything that I can support with related to ideas or curriculum planning or just brainstorming how you might be able to implement community-based learning if you're excited about it in whatever situation you're working in, I'm excited to chat after this or schedule a call and dig into your ideas a little bit further in the future. Or I'm also, of course, happy to share more about Field Academy's programs. But thank you all so much for your involvement. I really appreciate it. And thank you again.